Hi, I'm food and drink writer Ton Vin, here to tell you about a new podcast from KUOW and the Seattle Times. It's called Seattle Eats. I'll be your host and personal guide across our vibrant local food scene. So let's eat. Our first episode drops Thursday, September 19th on the KUOW app or wherever you get podcasts.
This is Soundside.
Hearing static when you enter a tunnel in the middle of a fascinating story? Hanging out in your driveway to catch the end of a report? We've been there. With the KUOW app, you can listen to your favorite programs anytime and anywhere. No driveways required. Let's get going. Download the KUOW app now, available for iOS and Android.
You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Denkmann. The Seattle City Council is preparing to take a final vote today on a pair of new laws that City Attorney Ann Davison and some city council members say could help the city fight drug trafficking and prostitution. Today, we're going to talk about one of those proposed laws, the SODA ordinance. SODA stands for Stay Out of Drug Areas. It would create a new gross misdemeanor punishable up to 364 days in jail and a $5,000 fine for being caught inside a designated SODA zone if you're subject to a judge's order to stay out. Last week, the council's Public Safety Committee advanced a plan that includes 6 SODA zones of several blocks each. They're located in Pioneer Square, Downtown, Chinatown International District, Capitol Hill, the University District, and Belltown. If the full council approves the ordinance, a judge could issue a SODA order to someone arrested for a drug-related crime, compelling them to stay clear of SODA zones. That's arrested, not necessarily convicted, so this could be issued pre-trial. That person would be allowed to take a bus or a train through the zone or ask for special permission to enter to see family or go to medical appointments. Critics of the new law have called this approach counterproductive. Publicly opposed are groups like the King County Department of Public Defense, Seattle King County Coalition on Homelessness, and the Seattle Indian Health Board. They're asking for more funding for services and alternatives to police. The Downtown Seattle Association is backing the ordinances. Council President Sarah Nelson and members like Bob Kettle and Kathy Moore have argued that the laws give the city more tools to improve public safety and break up concentrations of visible crime in specific parts of the city. We are scheduled to talk to Council Member Kathy Moore about this after the vote today. She introduced a related ordinance targeting prostitution on Aurora Avenue. Now, this is not the first time Seattle or King County has taken a geographic approach to addressing drug crime. My next guest was subject to a similar policy. In his case, a King County judge issued a several-block SODA, Stay Out of Drug Area order, after he was arrested in 2015. Joe Conniff is now a supervisor for the Reentry program at Evergreen Treatment Services, and that group has opposed Seattle's new SODA ordinance. Joe is also the author of Causes and Conditions, A Life Experience in Addiction and Recovery. Hi, Joe. Thank you so much for being here on Soundside today to share your experience.
Hey, thanks so much for having me today, Libby. Happy to be here.
So I just want to give people a little bit of your biography up until this encounter with the justice system in Seattle. You grew up in New England. You started using substances when you were a teenager. You moved to the Pacific Northwest in 2008, and you continued to grapple with addiction when you were living here. Can you tell me a little bit about your life here in Seattle during that time when you were on the street and dealing with addiction?
Yeah, as you mentioned, I arrived here in Seattle in 2008. I'm a post 9/11 Navy veteran. So after joining in 2002, I kind of continued to move around as I had plenty of challenges with substance use disorder that I geographically took with me everywhere, which included when I arrived in Seattle in the fall of 2008. I still very much had those issues with me at the time. And I managed to maintain employment. My then partner and I were able to have a daughter in 2011, but also with just kind of the challenges of day-to-day life and the fact that most of my coping mechanisms and ways to deal with stress was my reliance on the use of alcohol and a lot of cocaine, cannabis, but also at times almost anything I get my hands on. But I was not an opioid user at the time. But in 2014, I was involved in a domestic dispute in my home in which I unfortunately lost my place to stay. I became a vehicle resident seemingly overnight when I was released from custody. I was staying in my work van. This was 2014, summer of 2014. My seasonal work ended, so I ran out of the vehicle to stay into that had to go back to the farm that I worked for. And I started staying with a couple friends in the Burien area, and two of which were using heroin, which was something that I had tried once or twice, but had ultimately stayed away from, buried a lot of friends to it. But unfortunately, by that point in my life, not being able to see my daughter, the no contact order, the hardship of living out of doors, well, unstably, it wasn't all the way out of doors yet. And my father was slowly declining with dementia. I just, heroin became the only thing that would make the pain feel a little bit less difficult, a little bit more bearable. But unfortunately, the cost of doing business with that for me, with my living situation and my personal circumstances, is I chased it all the way up to Aurora, was in and out of motels, places like that. I got robbed at gunpoint, some other difficult situations that led me to believe that the safest way for me to survive was to go down to what I knew to be the area known as the Blade on 3rd and Pike, roughly, because there was a little bit more of a concentration of resources in that area, including like social service providers, also the community of people that I had learned to survive with, that were using drugs, that understood the way that I was dealing with life, because I had been stigmatized and kind of shamed and shunned from the rest of society as my problems deepened. And within a couple months of transitioning from 2014 into 2015 in the winter was when I started sleeping in Post Alley, behind Pike Place, and eventually was selling $10 bags of heroin to support my own use each day. And it wasn't even to the point that I was even getting intoxicated or high anymore. It was literally just staving off the withdrawal that was going to be coming.
So you were surviving downtown. You were selling small amounts of heroin. You were using, but like you said, just trying to stay like at level. It wasn't even getting you high anymore. And you were, having to sleep in Post Alley. And at that point in 2015, you have an encounter. You get arrested, and you end up in drug court in King County. And that was coinciding with this time when the region, the city, and King County were trying this geographic approach to addressing drug crime and open-air drug markets, which sounds really similar to what's happening today with these proposals. At the time, then Mayor Ed Murray and other officials were pushing a crackdown called the 9.5 block strategy. And that zone was downtown. It was bounded by 1st and 4th Avenues, Union and Stewart Streets. So it included like Westlake Park and the front of Pike Place Market and this much of the area that you refer to as the Blade. So what happens when you get arrested, Joe?
When I got arrested in April of 2015, I was in custody for about 10 days, and then I was released with the expectation that I would report to drug court services the following Monday morning. Unfortunately, with my lack of living situation, living out of doors, and lack of resources, I fell right back into going out to the place that I got picked up with. And when I was released from that 10 days at the end of April, they had given me a sheet of paper with my court orders, with the expectations of coming back to drug court. There was a single sheet of paper that said 9.5 blocks, stay out of drug area. And it literally mapped out the place that I had just unfortunately resided for the last 4 or 5 months. And so I found myself back out there that afternoon, and then arrested at Freeway Park for the final time a couple weeks later in May, which would be the one that I would end up going into custody to a transitional recovery program at the MRJC in Kent that summer. But that condition of the 9.5 block strategy was also still in effect when I was released on August 31st and expected to navigate the community to treatment obligations related to the court and my hearings and providing urinalysis, those kind of things.
When you were arrested at Freeway Park, so that second arrest, was that related to the soda zone, to a violation of the soda zone, or was that an unrelated arrest?
Unrelated to the soda zone. That was actually, I was in the park trying to use to get away from opioid withdrawal. and was happened upon with the other two people I was with by a law enforcement officer. And I had a warrant because I had not reported the drug diversion court. And so that was the condition of that arrest. I had, as I mentioned, the 9.5 block soda was still there when I was coming out of custody on August 31st. So that's when I would actually start to have to navigate the community and have that interwoven with the fact that that order existed in an area that I would be accessing public transit for most of the requirements of my court conditions.
So you had at that point in August completed what kind of program? You said that you were sent to a treatment program. What was that?
So there was down at the Mailing Regional Justice Center in Kent, leading up, I think it was finally no longer in operation around the time that the COVID pandemic started, but there was this, it was called the TRP program is the way that we referred to it in drug diversion court. It stood for the Transitional Recovery Program. And so ideally what it was meant for is for folks to be in some type of roughly therapeutic community in custody for folks that we're not going to be able to arrest their substance use by starting the drug court program in the community, because the program could be at that time anywhere from 12 to 18 months roughly. And so folks like myself who didn't have a place to stay, who were most likely to reoffend or use again, have a recurrence of use or relapses and be engaged in criminal or criminalized behavior associated with survival. It was a way to try to help get stabilized, which I responded very well to as a cis hetero white male in the system. They do well with structures and things like the military. And so I found it.
Yeah, I was going to say military veteran, you got to do well with structure for sure.
Yeah. Routine, so it was a program that I was able to go to treatment, like a treatment group. I think it was 3 to 5 mornings a week. I had a counselor in there. I had some veterans related programming with my veteran status. And so it did. It gave me a chance to stabilize in a way that I was not going to be able to out in the community with the resources and systems as we know them right now.
So you go through this program, you get to kind of a stable point, at which point you are released in August of 2015, and you are back downtown because this is where services and everything else are available to you. And that soda order is still in effect, the stay out of drug area order that you'd received earlier that year. So how does that affect your day-to-day life? What does that mean for you? How did you navigate it?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I remember being reminded when I came out of custody and on August 31st, it was okay, now, hey, here's some things to be aware of. Is this 9.5 blocks things is unless you're actively passing through there for transit needs and things like verifiable engagements that are not related to the things that law enforcement sees you associated with there, it's okay for you to be there. And so at first I wasn't really thinking a whole lot about the type of impact it was going to have on the way that I would plan, my transit day to day. I was able to get some shelter services in the Chinatown International District through the Salvation Army William Booth Center. And so all of my programming, aside from the place that I was staying, was either at King County Superior Court down at 3rd and James, which has its own area around there. Other activities that they were kind of letting us know, hey, you want to probably stay out of these areas. And I was also told that I needed to stay out of the area of the 9.5 blocks, specifically because that was where I was arrested from. And as I started to find, as I leave the shelter in the morning, go to the courthouse, if I needed to go to treatment, which was up by Swedish, up in Capitol Hill, the easiest way to get there and the fastest and most time efficient was to leave Chinatown International District, go all the way up 3rd Avenue, and then transfer over to the 10 or the 12 bus that would go up Pike or Pine. And of course, I'm beholden to public transit because I don't have a lot of other resources. I'm getting the bus tickets that I get. Is when I found that I was actually stopped by a Seattle PD officer that knew that I had been arrested out there months prior. It was hey, I don't believe you're supposed to be down here. And was asked, what are you doing down here? And I was I had my bag with me and I had my treatment schedule, and I was able to show hey, I'm I actually have a legitimate reason. I'm transferring the bus. And I was told that that was fine to do the transfer. And I was not arrested or cited at that moment, but I was late to treatment. I had to call the treatment group, and I found it to be an unnecessary amount of stress and what came across as a lack of communication within the systems that I was having to be aware and responsive to. That I wasn't going to be the only one that was going through this. I did have to, being late to treatment might have set me back in the court thing if I didn't have a good excuse or reason. Unfortunately, I was doing well in the program, so I wasn't second guessed about stuff. But
it created fear for you, and it created inconvenience when you were trying to get to your treatment, when you were trying to make it on time to appointments. Because again, this is a big area that you were subject to a soda order, a big area of downtown, and the kinds of places you'd need to be to get to the places you had to go. I guess my question is, for people who are looking at this and thinking about the impact that it could have going forward, they are seeing that there is this visible drug crime in downtown Seattle. You have areas that have been identified as sort of being the nexus of certain drug activity and related disorder. And city council members are saying we need this tool. We really need something to kind of break this up and create the ability to bring order to these areas. What do you think about that argument that the city attorney and the members of the city council are saying we can't tolerate this kind of open air drug activity? And so here's something we're trying to do. And maybe, yes, it will cause some inconveniences. It will cause some people to be stopped and talked to by officers, but that is a worthwhile price to pay if we're going to try to fix this. What do you make of that argument?
I think first is it's kind of like my question is, what's different about this iteration than the last couple? Because if this was so effective, like thinking back to the article that I saw from the Times about shortly after the crosstown traffic, the event that I was picked up in, as I said, that this 9.5 block strategy was effective and they're seeing a reduction in things. But so what happened then? Why are we here again now? Is that main throughway has not changed for all the bus routes. I think we actually probably have more stuff coming through there now too. And so,
yeah, we've been hearing about, Second and Pine for over a decade now. I mean, it's been a long time since we've been hearing about the open air, drug issues in downtown. So you're saying that this has been tried pretty recently before, and it didn't seem to have any lasting effects. And so why are we trying this again?
That's my first place to operate from with it, is is realizing is that we're being told again that we need to do this. And I'm asking what kind of evidence about this working do we actually have, other than what feels like, unfortunately, the political pendulum, where we're in the middle of a polysubstance crisis, a polysubstance overdose crisis right now. And this notion of moving people from one block to another, as if that actually is a solution. It's hard to even call it a Band-Aid, because the reality is people go to a different neighborhood, they pop up and they become another pocket of eyesore, so to speak, for the public eye that they don't want to see. But at least these people over here aren't dealing with them anymore. And I think the biggest issue and concern with it right now is actually lies more in this polysubstance overdose crisis that we're in. We need people to be more visible with their substance use right now if we actually want them to get the treatment and the help that we think that they need, and or those people decide that they want. And the reality is these kind of things push people further into the shadows, and we have a very toxic drug supply right now, especially with the opioids.
And can I ask the difference here? So we're talking about these soap and soda zones that are going to create, through legislation at the city, again, it's proposed, the city's looking at voting on that today, through legislation, 6 zones that will keep anybody that's under a judge's order out of these several block areas: downtown, Chinatown International District, Capitol Hill, University District, a few others. These are for people who, just like you, had been charged, or even in some cases that, they're just being diverted, but they have to be under a judge's order in order to have to stay out. That's in addition to what is currently happening in Seattle right now, which is that, we have misdemeanor drug possession and public use ordinances on the books. So the city attorney can prosecute those. The King County prosecutor, can prosecute those. When you look at soap and soda zones, I'm hearing you say you don't think that those are effective. These requirements to stay out of certain zones if you have been arrested for certain types of drug crime. What do you think about the laws that we have on the books just for possession and use right now? Because it did sound like your encounter with police being arrested was the thing that kind of got you into a treatment program and got you on the road to being the stable person that you are, who's now giving back to the community. How do you feel about basically drug decriminalization and trying to, moving in the direction of having no drug laws on the books? What I want to make sure we differentiate, I guess, between your opinion on soda and soap we've been talking about so far, but how do you feel about drug possession and use laws on the books?
Really good question, because it's difficult, and I'll be the first to say, sure, that program helped me, but if that's all we've ever known is criminal legal interventions, then that's all we're going to celebrate, and we've got a long history in this country of draconian prohibitionist drug policy, while having a ton of deaths from people drinking and driving and things that we don't address,
Joe, let me ask this, because I know some people will be listening to this and saying, well, Joe, in 2015, you were arrested, and that was the thing that put you on the path to recovery, that got you into a treatment program and ended up putting you on this good path that you're on. So what's your feeling today about the criminal justice system being that intervention that helps people get sober?
On paper, it would look like, for me to be able to, anybody could look at my experience with drug diversion court, with the arrest in 2015, and say, yeah, this intervention totally helped. And I'll say, yes, it did. And I'll highlight that there was an opportunity for an intervention with my substance use that could have occurred a year earlier, before I ever ended up having to reside in downtown Seattle. Is I was arrested for the domestic dispute at my house related to my drinking. When I was asked to report to Community Center for Alternative Programs, CCAP, that was the minimal amount of day reporting programming I had to attend related to my pretrial assault charge. Is they knew that I had a drinking problem. They knew that I didn't have a residence. I was talking to my attorney, talking to the people, the staff at the CCAP program, that I can't do this successfully because I'm living in a van and I have a substance use issue. And the reality that the services that were available to me with what I was aligned with at that time before my drug charges was not competent for the actual things that were driving the assault charge, the issues that I had related to substance use. And I was very clear with them that I had that issue. I could be subjected to breathalyzer or urinalysis when I was at the CCAP. And so I look at it as there was a year earlier an opportunity for the system to have a little bit more of an upstream intervention with me.
So the system basically made it worse before it offered the kind of services way, way later, after much more spiraling, that ended up making it better. Things got much worse before they got better.
Exactly. It was the biggest issue in my life that came about to make me eligible to what was actually created by the system and then resolved by the system. Now, that to me is not justice or equity. And I did not process it that way when I was first excited about my recovery. I'm super grateful for King County Drug Diversion Court program. I worked there for 5 years after I graduated the program. It was one of the best experiences. But my own thinking and looking at how do we better serve our community members, I realized this was a missed opportunity a year before. And the difficulty and the violence that I was subjected to, the increase of my drug use, the incarceration, none of it may still have happened, but there wasn't an opportunity. And I was asking for help. I was like, I can't, I'm sleeping in a park. I'm sleeping in an alley, and you're expecting me to do day reporting here. And they're like, they couldn't even do a shelter referral for me at CCAP at the time. And it was like, I felt, it was that to me was the biggest setup. So yeah, I think, if we're really invested in connecting people to treatment and preventing in the long run, is we've got to look at these opportunities for intervention far before people end up in the streets, because then there's so much more to undo and so much more support that's needed. The extensive trauma and chronic homelessness and substance use disorder that is very difficult to stop once people are in that cycle of living out of doors and cycling through correctional facilities.
And moving them out of certain geographic areas at that point, from what I'm hearing you say, is not going to do anything except drive it further out of view and potentially destabilize people to the extent that it makes it worse.
Exactly. And it destabilizes any outreach efforts, any other community-based or oriented case management efforts that occur in the streets with folks that don't have a residence or a dignified place to have a meeting with a case manager. I mean, this trust and rapport that organizations like Reach and a lot of these other folks that are doing good work in downtown, it's going to destabilize their work too, because the efforts and the ability to know where to find people. And I agree, there's public safety components, and like what ends up happening, like regarding spending of money and program funding in those things, is like this makes the work like whack-a-mole, right? It's like there's money inflow and then people get moved, and then we have to start to source the documents and financially support this person in a new environment, only to wonder when is the next displacement of whatever flavor this month or this year, if it's a soda zone, if it's an encampment displacement-based strategy, those kind of things, is constantly trying to figure out when is that next thing coming. And how do we keep your documents safe so that we can maybe try to actually connect an individual to the type of treatment and support that they need, not the stuff that we decide other people need. Like everybody requires a different kind of intervention in response for their use and the reasons why they use, or how they become homeless, or, why they have mental health issues. And so,
but again, at the point at which you were most vulnerable, you had just had contact with the criminal justice system because of this domestic incident related to your drinking. And instead of wrapping our arms around you as a community, as a criminal justice system, and saying, okay, this person needs a shelter, this person needs drinking and alcohol abuse support. Instead, there was the system knocking you further down into chaos and disruption and creating barriers to you getting to treatment through the SOTA order that you were subject to in 2015. And I'm hearing you say that those early interventions would be the best use of taxpayer dollars, of our resources as a community, if we actually wanted to solve this problem.
Absolutely. Looking at that opportunity that I had, just other places where people are engaged in some of these types of activities before they end up in the well-known areas. I mean, and I think there's flags for this kind of stuff all over the place. I'm sure there's other ones in my life that didn't just arise. I mean, I got kicked out of the military years ago for my drug use. I could find other opportunities for interventions, but it takes having more of a public health-based approach than a criminal legal approach.
Joe, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time today. And I know that it's a lot to kind of go through the timeline and dredge up old times that were really hard for you personally. But I appreciate your perspective on this as the city of Seattle is looking at reinstituting the kind of policies that you were subject to in 2015. Thanks again, Joe.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
And again, we're scheduled to talk to City Council member Kathy Moore after the City Council votes on the soda and soap ordinances. That's scheduled for today. SOAP stands for Stay Out of Areas of Prostitution, by the way. That zone is proposed for Aurora Avenue, and Councilmember Moore introduced that measure. Thanks for listening to Soundside. This show is only possible because listeners support us. If you're able to give right now, please check out the show notes for a link to donate. And don't forget, you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 FM Seattle at noon and 8 p.m., Monday through Thursday, or anytime online at KUOW.org.
Hi, I'm food and drink writer Tan Vinh, here to tell you about a new podcast from KUOW and the Seattle Times. It's called Seattle Eats. I'll be your host and personal guide across our vibrant local food scene. So let's eat. Our first episode drops Thursday, September 19th on the KUOW app or wherever you get podcasts.
KUOW is here to help you cut through the noise of election season. Check out Sound Politics, a new podcast hosted by me, Libby Denkmann, and Scott Greenstone. Plus, KUOW's partnership with A Braver Way podcast hosted by Monica Guzman, your guide across the political divide. More at KUOW.org/elections.